Welcome to our program, Jump Into It. Welcome to Jump Into It, a podcast and live show to help entrepreneurial-minded women jump into a better life. Today, we have with me my co-host, Anita Booth, along with me a very special guest, Katharine Campbell Hirst, who's going to talk about capitalism and how women can heal capitalism. She is a coach. She has a mission to empower women to look at equality and fairness in the marketplace and in the world. This is really a huge, big mission for her to undertake. And we're very interested in discussing how she plans to do this. And so please join us, and thank you for jumping into it with Katharine Campbell Hirst. Katharine, thank you for jumping into it with us.
Well, thank you for having me. I'm very excited for this conversation.
Fantastic, fantastic. So let's start with just some general questions. Tell us about your journey. Tell our listeners about a little bit about who you are, how you got to where you are, and what's meaningful in your life and in your career and where you are today.
Oh, well,
I know it's a big question. You
it's
can
a big
break
question.
it down to smaller pieces.
I will. So where to start? The last corporate job I had before I moved off into this entrepreneurial coaching space, so I was Tory Burch's speechwriter. That's sort of my title is I was her senior director of brand communications. Within the company, they call the job Tory Voice. And she is the face of the company. She's the name of the company. It's her name on the door. And I was helping her think about what she wanted to say, where she wanted to say it, the impact she wanted to have. And I did that during the pandemic, which was an incredible time for women's equality and what have you. If we'll throw our minds back 5 years, right? Everyone had their kids at home. There was no childcare. Women couldn't run their businesses. It was this whole thing. And she was really standing up and being an incredible voice around that. And I got to support her while she was doing that. And it was unbelievably inspiring. And my journey to that place, very eclectic. When I got that job, I'd never worked in fashion and barely worked in comms. My background before that was in tech. I had worked for a different, very successful entrepreneur. You can hear my accent. I was in London beforehand. Working for an incredibly successful, kind, charismatic, but very masculine entrepreneur. And I had this wonderful kind of 1-2 of seeing this very alpha male lead his businesses and create in his ways, and then see how Tory did it, and got to kind of think about how those were different. And I'm sure we'll come back to that. But before all of that, and I think the ultimate interest in these questions about power and equality and capitalism. I grew up in a bunch of what they used to call emerging markets. I grew up in 6 countries. My parents both worked in finance and were basically, if a country defaulted on its debt or there was some kind of crazy financial crisis, the chances of us moving there within the next 2 or 3 years are quite high. And so I grew up in all of these in these countries where it was, inequality was absolutely front of mind. The longest place we lived was Poland. The house next door to me was about the same size as our house, and there were multiple families living in this house. Multiple times, multiple kids.
You explain a little bit about what you defined as inequality and what you observed as inequality that kind of motivated you to move forward with making this a mission?
Yeah, so I think it's most of us grow up surrounded by people who are roughly a similar socioeconomic background to ourselves, right? Most of us live in a neighborhood where everyone's about the same. And I think the rare gift of my childhood is that's actually really not what happened to me. Like, on one hand, we moved to Poland literally a year after the wall came down. And so, the fact, the people next door to us were just as bright, just as smart, just as all of the things that it felt like my family had, but genuinely, I had a new ski suit and a new sledge every winter and all what have you. And they were all very, very clearly in hand-me-downs. I remember, one of the pivotal moments was making friends the way you can when you're a kid and you don't speak the same language as someone else. Made friends sledging outside with someone, invited this girl in for a hot chocolate, and I was about 8 years old. And we lived in a nice house. It wasn't a palace, but it was a palace to her, right? And just like seeing her face and being like, oh gosh, I did not understand, you know, how different our experiences had been. And I think it was just so clear to me from that young age that there was no good reason why I had things and other people did. And that's like stayed through my career. My undergraduate, my master's degrees were in politics. Like I was really studying, initially I was like very macro. I wanted to understand this at like the geopolitical level. I was, you know, looking at the UN or, you know, the World Trade Organization and trying to understand like how do small countries get a better deal? How do poor and disenfranchised groups like get policy that actually helps them? You know, it was a very macro perspective. And when I left college and started working, it became very clear to me that what I thought was the big lever, which was politics, actually wasn't. That really the power center in the current world is business. And so I became very, very interested in like who has power in the business world, how do they make decisions, what motivates them. And yeah, spent, you know, my 20s getting to a point where within a decade of working, I was working with people who were very senior and like had their hands on some of those levers and got to see up close how they make decisions and what they wanted to do.
So capitalism, like when we talk about capitalism, when we talk about the market, and the idea of capitalism is that the best will rise and the less competent will fall. So it's the premise, from my understanding, you can challenge it too, is that we're all kind of equal at the starting line, which is not necessarily true because some people have deeper pockets than others. Although, you know, you see the Oprah Winfrey's and you see these people for that are so disadvantaged on every level, and they excel beyond anybody's wildest dreams. But the idea is that there's equal opportunity for everyone at the starting line. And capitalism enables that, where socialism is or a class system, you're stuck in a certain class and you can't go beyond that. And you're kind of, you know, found generation after generation, you're stuck in that. And, you know, and it can be religion, can be also be that provide those restrictions for you. And so capitalism in some ways, and we did have a previous guest on it as well, it really helped her catapult to get out of a third world country, to get out of a bad marriage, to get so I'm not you know, so I just, you know, is it the devil that everybody says it is, or is it just how it's been manipulated over time, that it's no longer true capitalism, or it's or you know, the game, the rules have changed, so it's so unfair that you can't really call it capitalism anymore, the ideal sense of it. What are your thoughts?
Great question. I'm not sure the ideal version ever existed anywhere, like anything. Okay. One way I like to think of capitalism is it's a tool. It's a model. It's a way of moving resources, goods, money through an economy. It's a way of making things, right? You know, if socialism is we are going to make 1,000 paper clips and I decree we will build a factory here, and capitalism is like, oh, someone figured out someone ought to make 1,000 paper clips, and I wonder where we could do that. And it's, you know, it feels more organic, it feels more generative, and as a result, you know, unequivocally breeds, you know, tremendous innovation, and has more space for, you know, social freedoms and all these things that we love than other systems. So hence my, you know, we talked about this briefly before hopping on, like, I'm for healing capitalism. I think capitalism is the answer. I think it has movement. I think it creates innovation. I think that if we want to solve the big challenges of our world, you know, climate change, whatever else, like the best tool we have at our disposal is capitalism. It is the best way of allocating resources and all of that. The question becomes, and so one way to think about a tool, right, is it's like a technology. Like AI in the hands of good, smart people with good intentions will save us, and AI in the hands of callous, unthinking people purely in service of profits might be worse for us than climate change, right? So like it's a tool, it's agnostic. The question is who is pulling the levers, who has power, who is deciding what does and doesn't happen. And I think one of
Catherine,
the
I'm going to
yeah,
jump in because
please.
I think what I'd like our listeners to hear more about, and I think we all kind of get the whole how capitalism operates.
Mm,
And I think there are a lot of good things, but specifically when it comes to women, and
mm,
I think we heard you say healing women in capitalism. And what I think
mm,
that really just means in plain sense is women who are out there, working women, whether they're, entrepreneurs or they're in their corporate roles, they all have an ability to get ahead, right? It's free for everybody to hopefully work hard and get fair pay, fair treatment, and be selected for career movement based on your skill set versus how pretty or how loud you are, or what all those things could, feed into those promotions. So I really think our listeners want to know, well, what is it that you do? Do you bring women together and do some coaching around skill set, or you use the word healing, and I love it because from a consciousness perspective, I do think the world needs to be healed, and we all have a role to play in healing the world.
mm.
So I'd like to hear more about how you're helping women do these things in real life. What are the challenges women are coming to you with? Is it those things, I can't get ahead, or I feel like I'm not getting the same, opportunities as my colleague or my neighbor? On what scale are these discussions happening?
It's a great question. I think when a place to start is to think about sort of most of my clients are what I would describe as my generation. They're somewhere between sort of honestly like 35 to 45, 35 to 50. We're the generation that was told we could have it all, it would be equal. And it was until it was in the junior levels, it was in middle management. And as my peers started getting into senior management and up towards partner C-suite type places, it turned out that stuff that felt equal wasn't. The freedom they thought they would have, the respect they thought they would get isn't there. So a lot of my more executive corporate clients who turn up have, by the time they found me, they know they want something else. They want to leave corporate land and start a company. They want to take on they want to change their role in their company in some big way where they're taking on some big issue, whatever that is. And for them, those kinds of women are women I would describe as having understood their relationship with power. They know they can make things happen. They've reached a level of professional success that they know that they can have an idea and bring something to reality. They know that they can have an idea and draw a bunch of people to them and get excited about it, right? They understand how to make things happen. How to make things happen is kind of my definition of power. Like if you can take an idea and make it happen, you have some kind of power. But they want to do it in a different way. And so for those kinds of women, and really what they're looking for is closer to permission and freedom. Can I do things differently? Can I do things differently? Can I quit? Am I allowed to quit my well-paid job and become an entrepreneur and try and do that? Am I allowed to not make more money every single year, right? Most of us have unconsciously absorbed some level of what is success, what is progress, which is like every single year it gets bigger, the title gets bigger, the money gets bigger, the respect gets higher. Whereas actually, if you want to change your life in some sort of dramatic way, what you're going to do is it's going to look like you're taking your foot off the gas, because you're probably going to leave your job, you're going to not have a title, you're going to be standing at the school gate, someone's going to be like, what do? You're like, I don't know, I'm starting something, it's tiny, and so there's all of these ego and identity questions. There's all of these interesting things about visibility. Like, how does it feel? It's very different to even just turn up on LinkedIn and write a post as you, rather than as like a representative of some bigger company you used to work for, right? So there are all of these different ways where it's about having the freedom and the permission to use the power to do the freedom and permission to do what you really, really want, rather than what you feel like you've been told to want or what the system will let you want. And then the ability to go make that happen. And so, yeah, in terms of specific things, definitely working on things around visibility, definitely working around, I talk about power leak, which can be like when you, essentially, we all have this somewhere where we give away our power to someone else. Like, we let a bad review, a comment in a meeting, whatever it is, like really destabilize us. And, you know, so part of when I'm working with women on their power, it's like, how can you be so grounded, develop your center, know your worth to such an extent that when these things inevitably happen, they don't knock you off. And once you are in that more entrepreneurial place, you know, it's even more important that you can like weather these storms. So yeah, I mean, ultimately where I see myself with my clients is somewhere between, I'm like a mirror to their greatness. I hold things up, I show them what they're great at. I remind them who they are. I'm definitely a catalyst. You know, I come in, I have prompts, I have exercises, I'll call out, you know, something I see that doesn't seem quite right. And then the third part of it is, I definitely see my role as a bit of a maverick. My role is to be like, well, what if you did it differently? You know, what if you just said the thing you really wanted to say? What if you did that bold thing? And, you know, people get to borrow a little of my mischief as they go figure out whatever that is for them.
Look, you know, you brought up some really good points, because, you know, being an entrepreneur, and I've been an entrepreneur for over a decade now, and, you know, walking away from what society's defined as successful versus what makes you happy. And, you know, because we, you know, and I've got caught into it too, is that what they tell me is going to make me happy doesn't necessarily translate to happiness for me personally. And so now I got to detach myself between those status symbols, or what they define I need to exert my energy and focus on, to something that has more inner meaning for me, that's actually going to bring me to that true happiness that may to the outside world not look like true success, but it gives me the abundance and prosperity and happiness to really fulfill the life that I want to live. And that takes some shedding. Like, it's almost like a metamorphosis, like a, you know, you're in a cocoon as a butterfly, and you got to go through this to try to sort through what that is, that is for you, because it's not the same thing for everybody. What makes it, what's, you know, what our true self, and what makes us really feel that we have a fulfilled life. So, you know, I'm going through that journey, and I continue to go through that journey. But, you know, the beauty is that, yeah, women are getting trapped, but so are men. I think men are getting trapped just like women are, into these are the rules that you've got to follow, and this is what is defined as success. And if you deviate from it, you're a loser. And that is not true. All it's doing is creating this dissonance between who you are and who people want you to be. So, you know, thank you for that, because that is something that I think is going to make women feel more empowered to realize, hey, just because the Jones do it doesn't mean that it's right for me. Yeah. Yeah.
I think it's also interesting what you mentioned, and I can't remember if it was at the start or when we were chatting beforehand, but you talked about, or you said women, you know, in my age group, and I have a feeling there's probably a little bit of a difference in age groups, and that's okay between us and you. But what it made me think about was growing up in a different generation, and I think it goes back to how you grew up in those different socioeconomic circles, what you were born into, number one. Number two, also think the generational women generationally have been different, and expectations have whether it's increased or changed as life, as the decades went on. And I just wonder if you have seen that in your clientele and the women you're coaching. Do you see different? Because if I think about somebody a little younger, I think they are breaking down a lot of those barriers. I certainly know, I have nieces and nephews and kids in that age range where they're like, I don't want to work a 9 to 5. And why is it that, he can do that job? And, so the mind shift is already shifting. And so I think you are learning, the younger generation's learning faster some of the stuff that is taken, maybe my generation longer to learn, because we were so set and no, it was, and maybe again, Gabriel, jump in, but it was certain, like, there were certain achievements. That was the whole point, I thought, when I started my, education. And I was working from a really young age, part-time job since I was 12. I could name a million. I'm like one of those people who I've done everything, but certainly focused my career in a long committed career in marketing and communications. But that being said, I still moved around with the whole intent that it was about this, getting ahead, a little more money, and the title. And they it's still like that in the corporate world. It is about, your every quarter you have to do a personal review and get rated on on who you are and whether you're good at what you're doing. And so, you always got to believe that you're going to be rated. And if you're not doing a good job, then you're not moving anywhere. And maybe you're moving out the door. So that I don't think ever changes. But what I do think has changed is the mindset of the women coming into it, what we call the rising stars, the younger generation, that they're changing it. They're like, no, I can work from home and still take care of my family and still get the job done. No, it's got to be more flexible. So I think a lot more of that is happening now. But I'm curious if you see what I'm saying, which is, the younger ones, are they saying, oh, I imagine it's the older generation going, oh, I really want to get out of this job. What do I do next? Where the younger ones like, I'll take that job and that job. And they've got, 3 or 4 gigs going on.
Right. And we got to keep in mind, too, that we're looking at women that want to be more entrepreneurs than want to stay in the job. Right. Yeah. So you're talking about the mindset of a woman that is in the job and how the mindset is changing for women in the job, where I think some of the conversation is around women that want to get out of that job. And they may be at a different mindset depending on their age group to get out of that job. Like the older person it might be harder for them to get out of that job and be an entrepreneur than a younger woman that sees more of a more flexible. What are your thoughts? Do you think that based on our age group that younger women are more open to being an entrepreneur than older women are? Or do you notice a difference? Or yeah.
No, look, I think so let's just go back and zoom out and think about those generations, right? My grandma was born around the turn of the century. She was a teacher. Then when she got married, she stopped working. She was very bright. And when she had my mother, when you think about what she gave my mother, it was like, oh my gosh, you get to go do all the stuff I didn't get to do, right? My grandmother was like the most type A housewife of all time. And she got like her smart, beautiful daughter got to, go work in a bank with, the big 80s parachute jacket and the briefcase and got to live that life, right? And, it made my grandmother incredibly happy to see my mother be able to do that. And also, get married and have a kid and do all the other stuff that felt very important to my grandma. And, when my mother gave me her version of that, what was my potential, what would success look like for me, there was a big expectation. Like my parents both worked in finance and would joke a lot that like we probably could do with something else in the family. But like, so it wasn't definitely a like follow my footsteps thing I got from my parents, but it was definitely some version of fulfilling your potential looks like finding one or two, but not 20 organizations, and then figuring out how to work your way up. Right. My father worked for the same bank for 25 years. So I started my career at a big company, and my parents were like, I can understand this. I see what you're doing. And when after about 5 years, I was like, oh, I want to learn about startups. It was like the 2000. I joined the workforce in the 2008 recession, and it was very clear that like the growth that was coming once the recession was over was a lot of the exciting stuff felt to me as a young person was coming out of tech and technology and stuff. And I wanted to go figure out what that was. And like, you know, it was like a little surprising to them, but they could, get their head around it. And then at some point, and I think this is certainly common for most of my clients, I got incredibly disillusioned actually with kind of everything. It was, and I think this is where the generation younger than me that's like coming into the workforce in this new difficult economic period feels this even more strongly, which is the trade feels increasingly not worth it. Like you're working so hard for people who, unlike, my parents' generation, the company doesn't love you back. Like the company my dad worked for helped pay my school fees. Like they really looked after the family. It was like an entirely different thing. So it made total sense that he was giving them so much of himself because he was getting so much back. But once you've lived through a couple of recessions and you've seen your friends get laid off or whatever, and you're like, oh, I get, like there is no loyalty on the other side. At which point, suddenly you're like, oh, well, maybe I should work for myself. I should explore this other thing. I should, one of the things that's happening, right, I think for women particularly, I'm about to turn 40, is this like question about motherhood, right? Like it used to be that the only way you could take part in the workforce essentially was to go back very quickly after if you wanted to be senior, you had to go back very quickly and just keep your foot on the gas and like figure out how to have a family around that. And now, I mean, I took 2 years off between the job I did before, the job at Tory Burch and the job at Tory Burch, and I came back to the workforce into a more senior, better paid job in like a more desirable, sexy industry. And no one asked me where I'd been. I haven't even had a kid at that point. I'd just been traveling the world and having fun and learning about myself and what have you. And like, literally no one asked.
You didn't get penalized for it. You didn't get penalized for putting a pause button on your career.
No, literally no one asked any questions. At some point, I volunteered that at some point in those 2 years, I'd met my husband and moved to New York. But like meeting someone and moving cities does not take 2 years. And like, yeah, no one cared. And I think like a lot of my clients now, part of, I think, the freedom of, do I want to leave? Do I want to start a company? All of this, right, comes from this place of, it used to be, it was quite a one-way door and you couldn't go back. So you had to figure out how to make it work in corporate if you wanted to have that kind of career. Whereas now you can leave and start something. And if it doesn't work out, you'll just go back. Like, if you're good,
Yeah.
So so there's, the risks are much lower. Go have an adventure. See what happens.
Well, I think, it's not just, a generation over generation. It's the influences that impact the generation for that time period, right? So my mother did not have job opportunities. Either you were a nurse or a teacher, or you were a housewife. Those are basically your three options. Or a house clean or cleaning, or you're a cleaning lady, right? So there's not very attractive options for that generation, and there wasn't all this support
depending on where you lived, because your mother and my mother are, I think, around the same age, and my mother was very business, like work focused. And so I grew up with a mother who was always at work. Actually, my father had a great sales job, and he was home more because he was on the phone a lot. So it's interesting because you're
most women, but like just in general, like most kids were at home, kids were playing out on the streets, the
Yeah,
mothers
yeah,
were home, you had the
definitely.
filler brush salesman coming to your house, you had the Avon lady. These people would die a fast death if they relied on door-to-door salespeople, because nobody is home anymore in the daytime,
Or answering
right?
or answering. They've
Yeah,
got their
yeah.
little cameras. They're like, no.
Right, right. So it's a different world. And back then you had lifers, so one income
Yes.
could support a whole family. That's not happening anymore.
No.
Women are kind of, if you want to maintain the lifestyle, you want to exceed the lifestyle that you previously had, as a child, you got to go to work. So these are all social pressures that are forcing women to get into the workforce. And somehow along the line, nobody told us that we can get the husband to do the laundry and do the cooking and and buy all the groceries as well. I mean, we still took that on. I mean, I'm talking about my generation more, and plus had the full-time job. And now women are saying, hey, you know what? Going to the guy and say, hey, we want equal partnership here in this relationship. But the other side of it is also, we don't have lifers anymore. The employers are not committing to us to work for life. The restructure, layoffs. This is just, there's very few companies that actually embrace unions. I mean, this is just, it supports the gig economy. Gig economy meaning multiple jobs. So as just a matter of survival, we have to be more flexible. We have to be more open to new ideas. We can't be just in this one path and stay on this one track and think it's going to stay the same for the next 30, 40 years, and then we're going to retire. It's not like that. So I it's one thing you could say it's the gender thing, but it's way more than that. It's the way that the world just operates. And, you talk about capitalism. Well, capitalism now, it used to be, you would look at your budgets on a yearly basis. Now you look at on a quarterly or a daily basis and you make changes. And so, okay, well, we're not hitting our numbers. Somebody's got to go. So it's just really so dynamic, and we have so much more information to make decisions like real time. And that impacts everybody's at a much faster pace than we did before. So I guess what I'm saying is that it's not just a gender thing or a generation thing. It is the way the world just keeps evolving and changing, and we just try to keep up with it at the same time and figure out how to adapt and survive it. And so I guess the question I have for you, Katharine, as well, is that, in your support for helping other women, what do you tell them when they come with those challenges? I don't want to be doing this work anymore. I know I'm not going to be a lifer. I know that, my job is hanging on the line. I don't have a job satisfaction. What do you tell them to transition them to find themselves, find that right job or that right business? Or is that something that you do, is guide them into the right business, the right life? So maybe you can share how you would approach that and maybe guide our listeners with that.
Absolutely. I mean, I love where you finished it, which is the right life. Like, I think in today's world, normally when someone turns up, and wants to work with a coach because they're in some big moment of transition, they have some of the puzzle pieces of what they want the next stage to look like. But to run with the metaphor, they don't know if centerpieces or edge pieces. They're not even sure if they're all from the same puzzle. You've got some sense of where you want to go, but it doesn't all fit together into a picture. And you're like, I'm pointing at that. So the first thing I do with my clients is a series of conversations and exercises to just help surface more and more of what they want. Often it's, some of this is about how much money you want to make. Some of it's about the kinds of work that interest you. Some of it is about the sort of life you want. If you have school-age kids and it's really important to you that you can ramp down or take the summers off, we're going to be making very different decisions about what you point yourself at for the next few years, versus if they're about to go off to college or, you don't want kids or whatever that is, right? So like, I truly believe that you cannot help someone figure out where they want to go without thinking about all of those different parts of their life. We also live in a world, like quite a few of my friends are in their 40s, they're single. If having biological children is really important for you, then we need to figure out how to like really make a lot of space for that in the next like few years, right? And like if that's like actually your number one priority, like let's treat it like that. Which often is one of those things where you've got to that point because it hasn't been your number one priority, right? So really, I'm coaching people about work, but I'm really thinking about like what is the whole life you want, and how do we make sure that we're giving you the space, time, resources to point at all of those things. And yes, I am in no way immune to the idea of trade-offs. When I think about it as a puzzle, I often describe it as actually, it's the thing is it's 4D, and the fourth dimension is time. So part of it is that yes, you can have all these puzzle pieces, but maybe not all at the same time. And so what are the trade-offs you're willing to make about pushing the gas on one part of your life a little later, so you've got more time for something now, whatever, so really putting all that together is like stage one. And then stage two is essentially often some sort of quite difficult letting go process of walking away from whatever you had before, right? The older you get, the more of your life that is filled in, the more of the career you built, whatever it is, the harder it is. Such a conversation with a client this morning, like the harder it is to let go of this cliff face so you can like go jump off and see what's over here. You just have more sunk costs, right? So it's the process of giving yourself permission to say, I'm going to take my foot off the gas. One of the last week I was talking to a client who was very senior in advertising for a long time. And, she's also a really strong feminist. And suddenly, she's lucky that her husband actually does a great job. So she can take some time off and really think about what she wants to do next. But the ego and identity hit to go from being one half of a power couple to the woman who's at home looking after two kids and like thinking about, taking maybe a year or more to really think about what she wants next, right? That's actually psychologically very difficult, particularly if you've grown up thinking that you would absolutely not be that person and something is actually what you really want to do. So there's like the letting go stage. And then most people work with me because they want to be entrepreneurial. And then, as you well know, there's just all of the stuff you face as you start doing the things for yourself. Willing to be visible. You can't only get clients if everyone knows who you are. It used to, if you worked in corporate before, the only person who needed to know who you were was like your team, your boss, and a couple of sponsors. But you didn't need some like big public facing personal brand, whatever that is, right? And suddenly that's essential in today's economy. You didn't have to, probably someone else in your company figured out what to charge for things. And now you're sitting there having a conversation with someone on the phone being like, I want you to pay me X. And it's just you. There's no company, there's no brand, right? There's all of those psychological things that you go through as you start it. So really, with people who are exiting corporate, like that's roughly kind of 3 stages of the path. And then once they're actually started a business and they're doing all the stuff they love, there's always some new hurdle. Entrepreneurialism is never a smooth path. But yeah, that's like the kind of rough starting order.
Katharine,
sorry,
Gabriella.
Yeah, sorry. So the 3 things are pulling the pieces together, the life that you want to live, letting go of that life, that part of the life. So it's pulling in what you want and letting go of what you don't want, and then building up the brand and building up who you are. If you want to go
the bravery and all the things,
right?
all the things to do the new stuff. Yeah, exactly.
Okay. Thank you. Yeah, Anita, what were you saying?
No, I was thinking of that that brand piece myself, because I think that's probably a bigger barrier for a lot of women, because we tend to lose ourselves a little bit in others, right? We're always being, wanting the caring, the helping, and so we always extend ourselves and we forget a little bit of it. And so at work, that's what we're doing. We're in a role, we're there to help and do. And when you're going on your own, that is the biggest fear, right? Who am I? What am I supposed to tell people? Not only all the things around what's my company and those very business oriented things that you have to take part in, strategic thinking and all that, but I think about the brand per se, your personal brand. is so important. And I'm not a coach, but I do tell people, because I've coming across a lot of people in this that are looking to change, right? And they're, or they've been, excuse me, they've been let go. And it's like, well, what do I do in this downtime? Who am I in this downtime of being let go? And I think my advice there, and let me know if you agree, is that you have to start putting your voice out there, and that's also determining what that voice is, and whether that's now, getting your point across through some blogs, updating your profile and being a part of a community, extending yourself in places that allow you to figure out who you really are. So
and maybe changing the word that it's no longer downtime.
Yeah.
And exactly. And it's no longer downtime, but it's actually who you are now, right? And I'm just curious.
It gives it like the parameters around, you got to show up at this time, you've got to meet these objectives, these goals, all of that stripped away. Now it's all you. You're driving the bus, and that can be really scary when somebody's always told you what to do and you've relied on somebody telling you what to do. Now that's stripped away. When you don't have that job anymore, you've got to kind of go in and say, well, now I'm the boss. What is, who is that boss? How do I become that boss for my life? How do I start driving the bus? And that, some women, I mean, do you think all women can get there? Do you think all women can harness in on driving their own bus, or some of us, some women are just, it's not achievable? Because the question about being an entrepreneur, I'm not sure it's achievable for every woman.
I agree.
I think we're all wired differently, and some people are wired in a way that makes it much more possible than others. Like, I think the single, one of the recurring themes constantly in my practice is people's relationship to risk. And everything in today's world is risky. You could get the job and then get laid off 2 weeks later because the company didn't hit the numbers and it's nothing to do with you. Or you can work for yourself, and like any month, there's if you have health insurance, you're paying for it, right? There's like different choices about the kinds of risks that you're willing to take on. I do think that different people are just suited to different types of risk. And one of the things that can be a little dangerous is I do think we live in a culture that really venerates entrepreneurship. It's very much seen as like a bit of a solution. Oh, just start your own thing. And like people, I don't know, I think sometimes this kind of dominant internet conversation about entrepreneurship makes it look a lot easier than it is. Because the people who are talking about it, it's not so hard, but the people who talk about it are, trying to sell this lifestyle and probably trying to sell you something. They're like, oh, it's so easy. And it's like, well, for most people in the short to medium term, it's probably easier to just go get a job. Like entrepreneurship is like a long-term investment in self-actualization and like a different kind of happiness, a different kind of freedom after a really difficult like launching process to get yourself to that place.
I mean, some people that they got their mindset already, so it's a little bit easier to fall into that self-discipline than others, or they already have networking or connection, or they, like with my career, like leading up to it, knowing, so that when you're ready to make the shift, it's not such a hurdle because you're already building on that. Like Anita was saying, you're building on that brand, you're getting that exposure out there, so that when you actually go on your own, it's not such a huge dramatic leap or such a struggle or such a challenge. So many eliminate some of the challenges.
I do think it's achievable though to your job. Even you could be working in whatever corporate business, retail, whatever you're working at full time. Let's say more full time, and you're committed to that job. You like it, and you're doing well. But I think there's still a valid discussion around trying to still build who you are as a brand, letting people making people know more and more what you stand for, and having a voice. And that just makes you unique and authentic and separates you a little bit from, I used to work at a bank, right? I'm not the bank, Gabriel and I'm not the big blue bank. Just because I work there and there's a certain profile, like you said, your parents are in finance. Yes, that's my job. And I have a great, where it's corporate and all that, but I have me who's creative and entrepreneurial. And sometimes you have to know that and balance those two brands, the brand you bring to work and the brand who, you really are and want people to know who you are. So I think that I love that piece of it. And I hope that is a good conversation that you have when you're working with your clients. But and I am curious, Katharine, if it is something that you see people do struggle with more, is that element of how do I change the perception of who I am over here to become who I need to be over here?
Yeah, absolutely. And I do think it's harder for women. I do think women, at least in our culture, are socialized to fit in, to not stand out, to not want to brag, to not want to be the star of the team, to help everyone else shine. A lot of us start there, right? So on one hand, there's like the intellectual understanding. I like to think of it as like it increases your luck surface area. The more people who know who you are, the more people who know what you want, the more people who know what you're good at, the more people can send you opportunities, contacts, whatever it is, right? Like it's just the more known you are, the easier it is to call in what you want and whatever that form that takes. But it goes against quite a lot of our programming. And so it's really hard, I think, very difficult. Honestly, I think it was hard. For me, it was the hardest part of starting my own business, was definitely being more comfortable, being more visible, sharing ideas that felt new to me, that felt interesting, that felt different. I think it's very important.
Yeah, I think, what, this could almost be another podcast, right? To talk about how do you get into the comfort zone or the skills, the tools to build the brand. And I would love to have you, Katharine, come back and have that conversation, because as you said, that is a pain point in being able to transition over to having a more fulfilled life. So we're reaching the time here today. So I want to thank you very much, Katharine, for joining us. There's a lot of great insights and a lot of things that I hadn't been aware of. And you being in a different generation than Anita and I are. Maybe we don't highlight that, but your challenges, right, around motherhood, about the situation, putting your life on pause, reevaluating it, how to move forward, you helping women get there. I think this is a wonderful mission that you're doing. So thank you again for being a guest on our show. And I hope, a lot of women will take in and take value to what you've provided us, and some guidance and some inspiration. So thank you again for joining Jump Into It.
Well, thank you so much.
Thank you for listening. At Jump Into It, we empower business owners, marketers, and entrepreneurs to turn their dreams into reality. Want to supercharge your marketing efforts? Grab Jump Into It Breakthrough Marketing Guide, now available on Amazon. Uncover how to stop wasting time and money and create effective marketing strategies that deliver results with no more guesswork. Ready to take it further? Join our expert-led training at 360integralmarketing.com and get practical tools you can use right away. Don't miss out. Tune in to our podcast on Spotify, iHeartRadio, and Apple TV for exclusive insights. Stay ahead of the game. Subscribe to our YouTube channel and follow us on Facebook and Instagram. With the courage and knowledge to bring your ideas to life, get ready to jump into it.